Welcome to the walkthrough of the frequently made mistakes for assignment 4A. First, please make sure to thoroughly document your code. That means you have to have every line documented the way that my code is documented in all the examples we walk through in class. Secondly, and this is really important, please make sure to compile your code and run the unit tests. Many of the problems we'll see below are just simply syntax errors that would have trivially been discovered if you'd run the code through the compiler. And there's other mistakes that would be discovered if you ran the unit tests. So please make sure you do that, otherwise it wastes a lot of time. So let's take a look at a problem with perform crawl. There's a lot of stuff missing here. This code won't compile due to syntax errors, and it's just the wrong code. So make sure you go back and read the specification comments and follow them carefully. Down here is another problem with perform crawl. This code is overly complicated and simply doesn't work. There's no need to use flux just. There's no need to use count. There's no need to use subscribe. First of all, you shouldn't be using subscribe. But secondly, this particular use of subscribe is not going to block properly as per the specification comments above. For some reason, there's a second call to crawl page async, which makes no sense whatsoever. So this code won't compile, and then ultimately an uninitialized variable will be returned. So just well-rounded in problems. So make sure you go back and look carefully at the specification comments and ask questions if you need more help. Let's now turn our attention to some problems with crawl page async. This particular parameter that's being passed to map is incorrect. You need to get the page that's associated with the page URI. So you can see page URI is a parameter. You need to get the page, and there should be a straightforward way to do that. You've done that in all the other assignments. So go back and take a look and see how you did it there. You don't need to be calling flux.just here. You can just call images on page and page links async directly, instead of doing what you're doing here. This code here has a syntax error. It's incomplete, won't compile. Please make sure you're using a method reference here instead of a lambda expression. And again, this code won't compile due to syntax errors. Make sure you're compiling your code. These things are easily found when you compile your code. They'll get flagged by the compiler. Yet more problems with crawl page async. Don't be calling get images on page here. It doesn't belong here. Down here, don't be calling webpage crawler.getPage. That doesn't belong there either. Makes no sense to have it there. That should be called elsewhere. Yet more problems with crawl page async. This code is duplicating logic that should be handled by calling the proper helper method as described in the specification comments above. And if you do everything properly, there's no need to use a flat map in this particular manner. There's no need to use this kind of flat map anywhere in the code. Now let's turn our attention to some other problems. This is with the images on page and page links async method. This particular implementation is way too complicated. There's no need to use flux.from or montable.from callable. Just call the helper methods directly and then merge them together. Down here, there's problems. There's syntax error. There's no parameter that's being passed to just. And so that's obviously going to be incorrect. I'm not sure if you need just, but you definitely don't want to use it like this. And this parameter that's passed to subscribe on won't work because subscribe on requires a scheduler, in this case the parallel scheduler, not some result of calling a method. So that won't compile either. So make sure you're compiling your code. Yet more problems. This code has various syntax and semantic errors. It won't compile. It's just incorrect. The wrong method. Result is being passed to subscribe on. Again, subscribe on expects a scheduler, not the result of calling a method. Yet again, people are calling just with no parameter. Not quite sure what the thinking is there, but it's unnecessary. This code doesn't compile the way that it's written, and this code also won't compile. There's the right call to parallel. The right parameters being passed to subscribe on, although it's not clear you need to call it in that way at that point, but at least it's passing the right parameter. This implementation here doesn't conform to the specification comments above. Not sure what just flux.just image is being used for, but it's incorrect. You're using the wrong scheduler here. You should be using the parallel scheduler for things not single or immediate or new parallel. We'll see some other problems of that later. Here's a use of flux.just. It's unnecessary. There's no need to have that there at all. This code here is way too complicated. There's no need again for just, and you can simply subsume everything into calling images on page links async with the proper parameters passed in. Down here, we see some problems. Once again, the wrong schedulers being used. Don't be using schedulers.immediate. You should be using the parallel scheduler. Yet more problems. There's a parameter that's missing from this particular call, get page elements as strings. That's missing a parameter, so it's not going to get you what you expect. The wrong parameter is being passed to subscribe on. Again, that requires a scheduler, not a page. That won't compile. There's no need to call flux.just here. You can simply call crawl page async directly, and this code won't compile due to a syntax error because of the parameters that crawl page async expects. So again, please run the compiler. That is a very important first step to get the compiler errors out of the way. If you don't get the compilers out of the way, obviously the test programs aren't going to do any good for you. The unit test won't help you unless you fix the compile problems. This particular call here is not the right method to call. Take a look at the specification comment to get a hint on what to do. This won't compile due to the problems noted above. And make sure you add 1 to the depth field here. That's where that belongs. And then also make sure you use subscribe on properly as per the specification comments. Moving on, from iterable doesn't take a page. It takes something that's going to be an iterable, like a list. So that needs to be thought through carefully. You don't need to use from callable here. You can just call crawl page async, and make sure you use the right parameters to subscribe on if you need subscribe on here. And this call down below is unnecessary if you refactor the code. For a lot of the solutions, they're just so wrong that my comments may not be the most useful because there are just so many things that are going awry. But I'm trying to give you some feedback to help get you on the right track. There's another important parameter missing here. Get page elements as URLs. It doesn't take a parameter. It needs to take a parameter. This code here is too complicated. Just use a method reference and omit the mono.fromCallable stuff. You don't need that. This call to subscribe on is completely unnecessary because that's handled in the download image async method. Likewise, this call here you should not be calling image.block. Remember, we should not be blocking anywhere except one place in the code up in perform crawl, because that completely defeats the point of using reactive streams and functional programming. And again, this call to subscribe on is unnecessary because transform image async should be doing that. Let's keep on looking at some problems. Now we're with images on page async. Continuing on with images on page async problems. This code won't compile because you're passing a page to something that expects an iterable, like a list. There's a syntax error here. That's not the right way to pass a method reference. Likewise here, that's not the right way to pass the method reference. You're using the wrong syntax. This code has a syntax error also because it doesn't pass any parameters and it's in the wrong place. From iterable should not be called at the end. It should be called at the beginning like it is up here, but it needs to be called with the right parameter. Down here, we see some other weirdness. There's no need to be using subscribe on in this way because that behavior is subsumed into the implementation of download image async if you do it properly. Same problem here. Transform image async should be doing these things asynchronously, and so you don't want to be using subscribe on. This code is too complicated. Please refactor it all using download image async. I'm not even sure what is going on here, but it's way too complicated. None of this stuff should be here except using download image async. Same problem here. This code is also way too complicated, so please refactor it to just use transform image async, that method reference. And this call here is completely unnecessary if you refactor all the code above to be implemented properly. Now let's go ahead and take a look at download image async. So this code has just a whole bunch of problems. First of all, there's a syntax error here that you need to fix. There's a stray, close paren for some strange reason. And this is also the wrong scheduler to use. You don't want to be using the new parallel factor method on schedulers. You want to use just the parallel factor method on schedulers. Down here, this is using the wrong factor method. Read the specification comments above to get a hint as to what to use. It's also passing the wrong scheduler here. The wrong method is being called here. Very strange call. And you have a syntax error because from callable expects a parameter, and it's also just in the wrong place. You should not be calling that there. Here is download image async. Another problem with it, this call won't compile, and likewise, don't use mono from, that's unnecessary. And you want to use a method reference here. This has got a syntax error, it won't compile, but you want to be using a method reference instead of trying to make some strange method call like you're doing here. That, again, that won't compile. This code always returns null for some strange reason. For some reason, this implementation starts by transforming the image before it's even downloaded, which makes no sense, and I don't think that that will compile. I don't think you can pass an image enum to transform image async. That won't take the right parameter. Let's take a look at yet more problems with transform image async. You don't want to invoke get or download image here because it may return a null value that won't be properly handled via your implementation below. You need to emit the URL and then call download or get or download image here, because that will properly handle nulls. And you don't want to be passing a null. That makes no sense at all. Let's take a look at transform image locally and some problems here. Do not call Java streams methods. You want to stick with Project Reactor operators. You're not using the right scheduler. Something is missing here. There's a comment, but there's no implementation that conforms to that specification comment. There's a bunch of syntax errors here, and you shouldn't be calling get transforms get at all. That makes no sense. And again, don't call mtransforms get here either. Just lots of strange things, probably syntax errors as well. Take a look at the specification comments. You're passing the wrong parameters to from iterable. Make sure you pass the right parameter. Make sure that you use the right scheduler. The wrong operator is being called here. You don't want to be calling filter for this. You want to be using a different operator instead. And this call simply won't compile because the wrong parameter, there was no parameter, not even a null parameter. There's the non-existent parameter is passed here, and so that won't compile. And now we're on the final problem here. There's a parameter missing from iterable, so of course it won't compile. There's a parameter missing on subscribe on, so of course that won't compile. And this code won't compile because apply transform takes different parameters than what this will do. So as you can see, there are just an enormous number of problems with the code. So make sure that you address these problems and make sure that you come to office hours or post on Piazza if you have any questions.